Neil, you just gave a presentation out in Nairobi about managing Africa's risk in turbulent times, prospects for Africa and the Middle East after the Arab Spring. Give us highlights of this.
Good afternoon. The highlights of the presentation I gave was really looking at the two regions, the MENA region, so the North Africa, the Gulf and the Levant, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And it was looking at the overlaps between these two regions, given recent events, certainly in the Middle East. The short conclusion is that we don't think that there is a significant risk of contagion between the two regions in terms of some of the turmoil that we've seen.
Why don't you think there's a significant risk of that, Neil?
There are some marked differences between the two regions. In North Africa and the Middle East, there is a commonality of language, culture, and religion. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we see a variety of those languages, peoples, cultures, and therefore that risk of troubles going from one place to the next, we think is a lot less. Between the two regions as well, we also see an increase in trade, certainly from Africa to the Middle East and the Middle East to Africa. Although the direction of that trade currently is lopsided towards the Middle East trading with Africa rather than vice versa.
But does that mean that professionals in the insurance industry in the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa should rest easy and say, no, nothing is going to ever happen to us, and so we need not worry?
I think if that was the case, they would have a very easy life.
Right.
I think the other point to highlight is that the overlap in terms of insurance between these two regions is relatively modest. In most of the countries in the MENA region, as well as in Sub-Saharan Africa, direct insurance companies tend to be domestically focused. There are some operators that are regionally focused, but the direct players typically are domestically focused. On the reinsurance front, there are far more regional players, but even so, the overlap between the MENA region and Sub-Saharan Africa is still relatively slight.
What kind of regulatory environment exists for something like this? In many cases, it is ground that has not been broken and governments are just grappling with it.
The regulatory environment is certainly evolving. If we look at Africa, for instance, and I'll give a couple of for instances, South Africa is in the midst of creating its own version of the European Union Solvency II directive, which is called Solvency Assessment and Management. That is following hot on the heels of what is going on in Europe, and it is clearly a market-leading regulatory change designed to bring in a greater level of risk-based supervision and risk-based capital management to the insurance industry. We're also seeing positive signs that this is also occurring in some of the larger economies in Africa, such as Nigeria and also in Kenya. I think some of the impacts that are likely to come out as a result of the evolution in the regulatory environment is some of the changes in perhaps the accounting environment. We're aware that as countries and companies move towards international financial reporting standards, it may change some of the assets and liabilities on their balance sheet. And we believe that in the case of, for instance, Nigeria and in Kenya, some of the liabilities will have to be reevaluated, and that may cause the current financial profile of a company to change quite significantly. This ultimately, I think, will lead to changes in the structure of the market. Kenya, for instance, I don't know the exact number, but it certainly has a large number of insurers, and perhaps more than the country can currently needs.
Yes, Kenya has around about 40 insurance companies, but tell me, is there a difference between actual Africa's risk profile and the perception those, especially out of the continent, hold of it?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Is there a difference in Africa's risk profile and the perception those, especially outside of the continent, have of the risk in Africa?
I think for somebody who is not involved in Africa and is viewing the continent from afar, it presents a somewhat gloomy picture. The traditional perceptions, if you ask the man on the street in London, Paris or Rome, would say of war, famine and violence. Myself and those people who are coming to the continent regularly and understand the continent in greater detail would obviously say that while that perception is based in some historical fact, that the reality on the ground is changing. We are seeing the gradual emergence of more stable countries. So the reality and the perception are very different.